Hi, I'm Liz Larson.
And I'm Bill McKenna. We're the hosts of the New Life Perspectives radio show.
We're also the creators of the Cognomovement system, where we help you rewire your nervous system so you can rewire your reality.
Join us each week for great conversations, amazing guests, and cutting-edge information on health, consciousness, and the keys to transformation.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Back again with Bill McKenna. Hey Bill McKenna.
Hey.
Today we have a topic that may be controversial, but I think as we chat it through, you might like it. And it has to do with when talking doesn't help. And there's so many iterations of it, so many ways that we believe we use talking to, one, communicate and to solve problems. And so often it is absolutely not useful, right, Bill?
The irony is that we're really told this is the appropriate way to handle things, is talk it out, or just let a person talk, let off steam and talk about all their feelings about a thing and delve into the details of whatever it was that really bothered them, about you or about a situation that they experienced. And, I think the big thing is that our brains don't really know the difference in between being in the experience and reliving the experience. It's why sports pros just mentally rehearse going up to bat, how they're going to hold the bat, how all their muscles are going to work as they swing through and hit the ball over the fence. But this is when they scan their brains, they find that it's the exact same parts of the brain that when you're doing it or when you're imagining it. So it'll kick off the exact same chemicals, the exact same process. And the other thing is that we get good at it. Whatever that is, we get good at it. And when we say this, everybody's like, oh yes, hit a baseball, better. But we get better at blaming. We get better at resenting. We get better at hating ourselves. We get better at whatever it is. If you rehearse it, you're going to get better.
Well, it's not only that rehearsing it, meaning thinking about it again and again and talking about it over and over, that, you get better at it, but it actually takes on, it gets bigger. It takes on the influence of whatever's happening in the room you're in, whatever mood you and the person you're talking about are in, how tight your underwear is in that moment. The story gets bigger and broader and changes over time and becomes completely so far from the original truth that it's unrecognizable. It's like, sometimes a lifetime's game of telephone. So I think what we're really talking about in this context is maybe talk therapy, talking it out in therapy. If you think about how many times a person will say, I've been to therapy for 10 years over the same issue and nothing changes, except for maybe the problem is worse. It's more defined, more delineated. It takes in more people. There's more people to blame. I think where it does help, sometimes there are secrets in life, something someone's been through that they've never told anybody else. In that case, there's some real value in sharing the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But sharing it again and again and again after that really just deepens what you and I refer to as a neurological pattern around it. I think this is what people don't realize about our memories, our experiences, is they aren't just one thing. They're the moment the experience happened, What hemisphere of your brain were you in? Were you a child and your brain was learning? That means you might have been in the left, you might have been in the right. What happened 2 minutes before that? Were you scolded? Did someone kick you in the knee? Did somebody stick their tongue out at you? Were you hungry? Was your blood sugar low? You know, was it sunny outside and you wanted it to rain or vice versa? Like there's a whole setup of things that sets the nervous system up to have an opinion about that memory in the first place, that makes it poignant in a life, that when you retell it, you don't remember any of those details. What you remember is the feeling around it. And the feeling around it is what's important. But then it drives this whole storyline around a thing that can be completely untrue. I was talking to a person today who was telling a story about her college days and a situation where her college roommate had gotten involved in some things that they shouldn't have been involved in, and the parents found out. And the parents showed up and ripped that kid out of that house so fast, took him home, took him out of college, all of that. And the roommate, the person telling the story, was so hurt because the parents were so mean to them, as though it were their fault. And all these years, they've thought about it as an affront to themselves, that the parents were being mean to them. And in retrospect, 25, 30 years later, what she realized was those were parents who were terrified for their child. It didn't matter who else was in the room. They were there to get that person out and get them the help they needed right now. And of course, they were angry and upset, but didn't have anything to do with the person telling the story, right?
Yeah,
But all these years, they told the story about what an offense it was to them personally, where it didn't have anything to do with them, right?
absolutely nothing to do with them.
So it's about perspective, right? It's
Yeah.
about time, place, how many times have you relived it? And so then talking about it really isn't that helpful. The place that needs to be looked at is at the level of the nervous system that recorded the feeling around it, and that persists in creating that feeling. But let's shift for just a second and talk about kids. You have kids, you have a child, I have kids, and they get in a snit about something, and then you try to sit them down and talk to them about it. How well does that usually go?
It doesn't typically go that well. The thing is that as an adult, you can cause that child to like repress, like, don't you get mad, don't you talk back to me, don't you, and all you're doing is you're driving that conversation nonverbal.
Yeah,
They're going to have that same conversation in their mind, and it's it is something that you're really not going to then have access to, but they really have a very hard time changing their mind. They'll do things to get out of trouble, to stop somebody from talking to them, giving their opinions, that sort of thing. But the problem is that the underlying situation really is what it is, and they oftentimes will just say whatever to appease.
right. Yeah. Or you say, what's wrong? And they don't have any idea, right?
Yeah.
How did this happen? What are you upset about? Well, you won't understand because you're old, or I can't tell you because maybe I'll get in trouble, right? And so oftentimes in asking the question, what's wrong? Right there, it starts this groove in their nervous system of resistance. They're going to push back at you, right? You're not going to understand. You're going to make fun, or maybe they can't even verbalize because they don't actually know. We started this conversation actually yesterday. We were talking with our business manager about a song that she wrote when she was a kid, right? And she wrote the song. It's called Somebody Else. It was about wanting to be in somebody else's shoes. And she wrote it when she was about 20, and I was recalling what was happening in her life around 20. We could not figure out for the life of us why she felt that way. Like, where was the big trauma in her life? So, this brings up something super interesting. The thing that can cause a problem would not be on the surface what anyone would call a trauma, like not an abuse, not the death of a parent, not not being injured or hit or something, but betrayal from a best friend, going to school and wearing something stupid and being made fun of, not
Mhm.
getting a part, maybe, you know,
Mhm.
the boy you like not liking you back. All of those can actually constitute a legitimate trauma to the nervous system, an injury
Mhm.
that then creates this cascade of things. So in her case, it turned out like she was a little bit paralyzed in terms of moving forward in her life at that time. Just wish she could be anybody else, even though she had all the things, right?
Right.
But asking, what's wrong? What happened? She didn't know, couldn't put her finger on it. The conversation was actually more hurtful than helpful because she was like, I just don't know what's wrong with me.
Well, you know, one of the things that occurred to me is the parents' trauma. Like, you're not even aware that you're taking on a parent's trauma. For example, um, uh, I had no idea, but I thought I invented the estrangement. I thought I was the original inventor of push somebody away. Just, like a complete push them away, don't talk to them, shut them off, because you're not going to be able to reason with them or get them to change their mind, and they're not going to change. So just block them off, just wall them off, go into Never Never Land there, into the zone where I don't communicate with you, so that I don't have to deal with you, because there ain't no fixing things. So anyway, I thought I invented that. Turns out, I guess it existed before me, but there's entire cultures I come to find out. It's very Irish, it's very Italian, and it's very Mexican. This is, the different cultures that I know about, and I'm sure beyond those cultures, there's an awful lot of it going on as well. But but it wasn't until, my father had even passed away. It was long since, he's gone. And I remember I was talking with my mom about, you know, uh, basically, doing that to people, and, and she was, she laughed. She laughed. She goes, "Oh my God, that was your dad's signature dance move." you know he said, he made this, I still remember, "You got no friends, you have no friends." He's like, there's that type of thing. But you pick it up, when something happened and they're talking about la, 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 and all of that jibber jabbering of talking. What happens is we take it on without even knowing. uh it gets embedded in our nervous system, and then people are you act that way and you have no idea why. That's my defense mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah. You learn it without being taught it.
Yeah, you've learned without being taught.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take our very first break. And when we come back, let's talk a little bit about how sometimes these stories, they not only take up like the ambiance of the room and the time, but they actually start to pile together. And how you don't necessarily know how many things are linked all into one sensation or feeling and one story. So when you're talking about one, you're literally talking about 30. All right, let's hear from our good sponsors and we'll be right back. Okay, and we are back. We're talking about when talking doesn't help, right? So let's talk about when one thing is actually 30 things. So when a person has an original upset to their nervous system, it's usually sometime pretty young in life. And it's often a small thing. It can be a big thing. Sometimes it's a small thing, right? So, you know, you overheard your dad saying, that kid's a hellion. Actually, I know someone that's true. And it was like an original injury. It wasn't their dad, it was their mom who said, overheard them saying, you take him with you. He's a hellion. You know how parents talk.
Yeah,
Heard that. But at the age and the time and all of that, when it happened, the kid really took it to heart. So there's the first time. Like you've talked about being bad bastard Billy, this person was a hellion, you know?
yeah, yeah,
So then, fast forward in time, they get in trouble at school because they're a hellion in their mind, right?
yeah,
Fast forward, like they get in a fist fight at high school. Well, that's because they're a hellion, right?
yeah,
Then later on in life, they're in an argument with, let's say, their wife, and the subject of their behavior comes up. And maybe it's a small thing like, hey, would you just not do that in public? You know,
yeah.
maybe don't be so loud. Maybe don't insult someone. And then there's a massive blow up, right? They just blow up, lose their mind, big fight. But what is it really about? Is it about that moment? No, not at all.
Mhm.
It's about all the moments before that you're a problem because you're a hellion, built on that very first one. So now when husband and wife are in an argument, the wife feels like she's talking about that moment. I just said, hey, would you just, be a little nicer to Aunt Frida, whatever. And now it's a huge deal. So this is another area where talking it out is not going to do any good because the people are not talking about the same incident. They're not talking about one thing, and the wife would have no idea, and the husband doesn't either. So what you're trying to do is argue 39 points from the past, right?
Mhm.
So you were talking about this earlier, like when people say, I've told you 1,000 times. You know that argument?
Oh yeah, yeah,
But really, have they? Yeah, maybe. But what the person has heard has not been the actual message. I think
Y-
that's the big point.
it is. You can't actually hear it.
Yeah.
You can't actually even hear it. It does not compute. Um, and it's really amazing because it's on both sides. I think a point that so many people can relate to is beauty. You know, uh, when somebody says you're beautiful, oh, you're handsome, you have beautiful hair or something, and you can't even hear it. Literally, it passes over your head. This this is something that so many times as men and women, we see out there, uh, where someone says something that's beyond the scope of your ability to even comprehend it. And with that, you can't even hear it. You know, this this is in all aspects of life. There's even offers of business opportunities, but I can't hear it because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit my idea of the envelope of wealth that I fit into. I am comfortable being this wealthy,
Yeah.
or this impoverished. But these type of things really are so important to approach from a completely different point of view. And one of the things that I learned from you, Liz, was related to your eyes and having a conversation with somebody that maybe you've had many times before and sitting somewhere else at the table. Maybe you could tell them about how you have changed people's lives with this simple technique.
Well, I'll tell
And
people.
why does it work?
Yeah, so this is one that parents will really appreciate. You know, when you've told your kid 1,000 times and they just cannot hear you. I had a mom that I was working with who was homeschooling, and she had a daughter and a son, and the son, every time they were homeschooling, she was so annoyed, so irritated. Just want to murder this poor kid. You know, he wasn't doing this right and he wasn't doing that right, but the daughter was okay. Well, during the course of the session, I found where her body would light up with anger just around an eye position. So each of us has an eye position that correlates to certain emotions. It's the files in our brain that attach to one end of a neural pattern. So if you put a person in a specific eye position, you can bring up anger even when there's nothing to be angry about. They're like, I feel mad, but I don't know why. Or conversely, there is an eye position that you can turn on love. We call it the love direction, something Bill discovered. And, you know, or you can find a place that will turn on ideas and inspiration. It's really like the files of the brain that attach to our feelings, our neural patterns. Well, in the course of the session, there was a position where anger lit up for her, and 3 guesses where her son was also sitting every day during homeschool. You know, it was down and to her right is where her anger position is. So whenever he was there and she's sitting in the middle, she felt angry toward him. So all we did is have her move him across the table. So she was straight in front of him and her daughter was then to her left, and it all resolved. It was perfectly fine. But she had no idea. She thought it was true that her son was all of these things around homeschool. Turns out it was just the psychogeography, the position that he was in related to a part of her visual processing that turned on her annoyance and irritation. So this is a big thing to know. If you're having a conversation with somebody, especially a spouse, and you find that you're always sitting with them in the car when that argument happens, or you're sitting next to them on the couch, or you're sitting at the table, make sure that you're in a completely different position the next time you have the conversation. You know, maybe stand when they're sitting, maybe sit when they're standing, maybe just move to the exact opposite side intentionally and see if it changes the conversation. What's so interesting is what you're saying will be received in a completely different way than before. You know, it's that, you know, pounding your head against a wall. And this applies to all of us. Every human, this is the way you function. And so when you recognize that you're having a conversation that just isn't working and it's a repeat one, change your location in the room, change your height, change your, you know, left or right, you know, sit or stand, and it will change everything. It's a really weird little trick, but it works amazingly. You can do it at work as well. You can do it with parents. It works great.
Yeah. Isn't that, I mean, you know, for everybody out there around the world right now listening to this is so important. And one of the things about it that I love is that the practitioners, the Cognomovement practitioners know is to be a keen observer when people are talking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the talking doesn't seem to work, but the information you get when they're talking works. And what do I mean by that? Well, traditionally you would think, well, the information I'm getting, that's what they're saying.
Mhm.
No, what I'm talking about is what position their eyes move to. They'll dart around, but they'll continually go back to a particular place. And with that, that is the place that you want to avoid. You want to move yourself physically to the different part of the couch, different part of the room, like you said,
Yeah.
stand up, sit down, all those things. And and the thing is, what you'll find is it's very uncomfortable for the other person. I I I've seen it where people are like, this really hurts my neck. You sitting there, can you sit over there? Yes, it hurts your neck. Yes, you don't want to look over here. Of course you don't. The problem and the solution are in the exact same place. You don't want to look over here because this is the area where you will find the true answers to your situation.
Yeah, it's so funny. We think about elderly people and how they get stuck in their ways, right? They can't see anybody's perspective. And what we find is that, as you get older, that visual reference gets smaller and smaller. We move our eyes less and less, When an elderly person, when you can get them actually to expand that vision, all of a sudden, strangely, they can accept other people's new, ideas. They see the world fresh again, right? They're no longer so stuck in their ways. So simply understanding eye position and the ability to shift it to another place or expand it even a little bit can change a conversation radically. Today I was working with someone who had really something from their past that weighed heavy, heavy on their body and mind. And there was a real positive to it and a real negative to it. So I asked her I could see where the positive was. Her eyes were moving there. And I asked her to actually reach out into space and kind of touch the area that seemed like it felt like this really wonderful part, right? So I added to the visual representation a physical aspect, reaching into the field, right? And boy, you could see her body just light up and it was delicious. It was like that beautiful thing had happened all over again. So then I asked her, you know, reach out and touch the place where the nasty part of it lives. And immediately it was right there on the opposite side. And she knew right where to reach. But when she went there, her eyes were so sore and in so much pain, and they glitched and it was a mess over there visually, right? But for me as a practitioner, I can see where her solutions are and where the problem state is. And knowing that information, I can move the problem state, or I can get the eyes to actually look there and now process it. Just by holding the eyes in that position, the situation starts to process through the nervous system. The brain will look at it from a brand new perspective. And if you know just to go between the two, pretty soon they sort of cancel each other out and you have the neutrality. What's interesting about that is, like, why would you want to cancel out the beautiful, delicious part? Because it was artificially elevated as a pinnacle moment in life, that the only thing that mattered, meaning the rest of life can't be as joyful as that one, right?
Mm.
So it got diminished down to, yes, a lovely moment, but not the only thing that matters in life. And the negative side was like, oh, okay, I see that from a completely different place. Now the whole situation is relegated to just a memory, just something from the past. But simply
Mm.
just with knowing that conversation, trying to reason around this is never going to change her opinion. Knowing where her brain and nervous system hold on to that piece of information, how it processes, gives you the insight into changing it. So it's time for us to take our next break. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the solutions that a person can find for when communication is not working, when it's just not helping, when talking it through is not the answer. And we're back and we're talking about when talking it through just doesn't help. I'll tell a funny story. We were at our practitioner training, our advanced practitioner training here in Oregon. Everybody was up. And they were asking questions about this specifically, about using what we call psychogeography and moving around the room. And they said, well, Liz, how would you do that in practical way? You know, how would you actually show somebody how to do that? So they're all sitting and I'm talking. And as I'm talking, I'm messing with the plant on the left. I walked over and messed with the plant on the left a little bit, and we're talking a little bit more. And then I walked over and changed a light on the right. And then, we're talking a little bit more, and I casually move back to the left. I move up a little higher, and I'm messing with a curtain, and then casually, walk back to the other side to the right, and I'm adjusting this or that. And they didn't even realize what I'm doing. And these are our advanced practice. Like, they know this stuff. But I simply was moving from their left to the right hemisphere by changing my position in the room so casually that they didn't even catch what was happening.
Their eyes were following you because they're a little bit interested in, like, why are you fiddling around there with the drapes? How does that, and they're following you with their eyeballs, which means that they're in a different part of their brain. Everywhere you look's a different part of your brain. So you were forcing them, it just so subtly, to use the rest of the brain.
Yeah. So I messed with something down low and then a little higher. And then so I'm moving through, a whole wide swath of eye positions by just moving nonchalantly. And they asked me, do you ever, if I do it in my everyday life? I'm like, absolutely. It's an easy one with my husband. If I want him to think about something differently, he's sitting at the kitchen table, I'm doing the dishes or walking back and forth or cooking, but I strategically find a time when that would be an appropriate, position for him to be sitting in where I am, right? I mean, it's a little evil, but it works because, in our relationship, like everyone's else's, you get in a rut and certain things create fear. Like for him, like if I have an idea about a project around the house, in the past, he would kind of get upset about it. I'm like, what is he getting upset about? Why is he always freaked out? It's just an idea. Well, in his mind, he thought an idea meant that he needed to do it now. He needed to be able to afford it. He needed to have the tools. He needed to have the time, which put him into a little panic mode. Well, I am an idea person. I love talking about what ifs. So we were talking about what we thought was the same topic, but completely different time frames. It was like two different conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to modify, when I understood it, I had to modify my conversation. So I'll say, I have an idea, but it's just an idea. I just want to talk it through. It has nothing to do with now. We're not doing it now. And he's like, okay, and happy to talk about ideas. He likes them too, right? Or if it's an idea that I know we do need to take care of now, I might use this other tool so that his left brain can think about it, his right brain can think about it, right? So he has his whole brain, not just the limbic system that goes into a little fight or flight. Makes sense, right?
Makes perfect sense.
So it's a completely different way, I think, for people to think about communication and how to actually relate to each other.
That is really a great way to go. Now, you had also developed something called conversational cognomovement for relationships.
Yeah.
So this incorporates the movement of your eyes and in a way, kind of an agreement to work together. Yeah, but it's a very subliminal agreement to working together. So tell us about that.
So it really is very simple, and yet there are some pieces. So normally when we have a conversation, you say this, so I say that. Well, I say this, so you say that, right? We get in what's called a calibrated loop. I preemptively think I know what you're going to say because I think I know you and I know how you're going to feel about this. And you preemptively assume what I'm going to say because you think you know me. And right. So really, it's a conversation where you're really talking to no one. You're really not talking to each other, right? Or a situation where there really is a problem state that needs to be solved. And both people are very tense and also held in what they think about the situation. Consider like a child and a principal, for example, because what I'm about to share, we did use with children and principals, which worked amazing. So a singular conversation, as we all know, can actually create a lot of trauma for whoever's in that conversation, especially if somebody says something, untoward and you take it badly, and, it can be a big deal. So conversational cognitive movement is something practitioners use with clients, but people can use it with each other. And what it is, cognitive movement, we use a ball. And you simply start to toss the ball back and forth. Now, here's your first agreement. How fast are we throwing this ball? How hard are we throwing this ball? How far apart do we stand from each other? So interesting because you fall into that agreement without ever saying anything. Now, the second layer is there's a kinesthetic aspect. We Italians talk with our hands, but most of us are not actually doing a process like throwing and catching while they're talking. So we're demanding that another part of the brain, another part of the physiology engage with having a conversation, right? Another kind of an agreement we're having, right? We're going to throw a ball. There's a certain kind of a cadence. And how you start to throw that ball also will dictate how fast or slow that conversation goes, right? So we start the conversation and one person says what they're going to say. The other person now says what they're going to say. Each person takes a turn. And it doesn't even matter what you say. This is the interesting part. Each person gets to have their full opinion, whatever they want to say. But there's a little pause where one talks and then the other talks. Now, then we start to move that ball up the body, right? We know that when the eyes are in the down position, following a ball, catching and throwing, we're in our kinesthetic body. When we start to move the ball up the body towards, the neck and the face, we start to move into this logical mind, neutrality, auditory, visual area. It's super interesting. It's the space where people space out, but it's also the space where your knowledge, what you know, what you think is. Then you just continue to move the ball up and eventually end up in ideas and inspiration. As you move through these zones, these visual zones, plus the kinesthetic tossing the ball, as a listener and observer, you'd be shocked at how the conversation changes. So you're moving left hemisphere, right hemisphere, kinesthetic, auditory, visual, ideas and inspiration while having this conversation. What's funny is because you're making so many nonverbal agreements that pretty soon the verbal falls into agreement too. You see it from a perspective you never dreamt you'd see it in. You come up with solutions you'd never dream you would find because the whole conversation is handled different neurologically, right? For parents and kids, for teachers and kids, for principals and kids, it prevents the child from being traumatized just by having a confrontational conversation in the first place. And it prevents the adult from being, yelling, being aggressive, because a lot of times the adult in that situation is also in fear as well. That brings up another point. This tones down the nervous system, the limbic system, the fight or flight system. So the conversation is not held in a place of fight or flight. It's constantly moving and shifting. And so the outcomes are just absolutely spectacular and fun and interesting. And often the conversations are just shortened way down to a short period of time, just abbreviated.
It's really amazing because it sounds like almost like magic, like holy cow, you mean to tell me, you're having a conversation and tossing this ball. Now, it's a very particular way that it's being done, but as you can see, it's basically accessing the brain in different ways quite rapidly.
Yeah.
And you're really fully utilizing the nervous system to autocorrect and to
Yeah.
find harmony. And uh, the resolutions, have you found that this works for married couples?
It works great for married couples. And married couples, we're the worst. We tend to get right in those, have those same conversations, the same argument 1,000 times. We get in those ruts in the worst way. If every married couple could understand that you are not talking to your spouse, you are talking to their whole history. You're talking to the way their parents fought, or the thing that they hate about the way their parents fought. You may be talking to generations of culture and how they handle conversations, right? And the same, they're not talking to you, they're talking to their history. So if you can learn how to talk to each other's neurology, and there's ways to really strengthen that, and there's ways to not strengthen it, to destroy it as well. But if you can learn to culture each other's neurology, the conversations not be only become easier, the communication becomes so rich and so deep, and marriages actually can flourish in a way that you would have never felt possible, even those that are on the rocks in the first place. And the reason is that most people's problems in marriage is communication. And it starts from probably the first day you meet
Mm-hmm.
and continues on. Now, the longer you're married, it usually gets worse. But this can be used if you've been married 100 years or 5 minutes to change the way that you communicate and understand who and what you're communicating with. And that words rarely land the way you think they do. And knowing how to read if they've landed for your partner or not, that's another level as well. Knowing if what you've said landed in a way that was heard and understood, there's indicators of that. Or if you just, hit a nerve and shot them into their limbic system, into their fight or flight system. But it just as simple using a ball to have a conversation can revolutionize a relationship. I was thinking too about kids and learning, that using a ball with kids in conversation or learning is super valuable too, because you're accessing all those same brain points. And it doesn't have to be a ball, it could be a swing set. If you and your spouse went and had a conversation on a swing set and made sure that you change sides, like sit on their left and then sit on their right and had your conversation, or sit back to front, completely change a conversation. Or put your kid on a swing set while you're teaching them their ABCs, or math facts, right? All of these things change the area of the brain and nervous system that are learning, and it gives a whole wide range of options for that, instead of just the one that's being kind of like beat into their heads with, all traditional ways of learning. But, conversations are learning. When we're having a conversation with our spouse, if we're actively listening, we're learning more about how their system works, rather than just taking in or spitting out data and information.
What an amazing service. You're taking something that has no hope, uh, trying to get somebody to change their mind is so very difficult, because you're talking to their brain, and you're fighting their feeling. Their feeling is in their body, and they can't think greater than they feel.
Yeah.
When you're doing this toss, all of a sudden what happens is the feeling changes, and then the thought can change. It's
Yeah.
really very difficult trying to reason somebody out of, let's say, being jealous. Like, oh, I wasn't looking at them. Why are you doing that? I've seen this before where
Oh,
lovers, like, there's somebody I know who's like almost blind. Like they can't really see. The glasses are so thick, and they're at a restaurant, and they can't barely see. But so they gaze off into the restaurant, and it just so happens that there's a beautiful girl somewhere in the restaurant, and the girl they're out with is like, well, if you her, you can just it's like it's just like
yeah, right, 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 right.
you know, can't even barely see across the table. But anyway, the thing is that is trying to reason somebody out of it. It just doesn't work.
No.
You have to, whatever that is for them, that changing that feeling is your way out. And it's so easy, and it can be almost like play, like that conversation with a ball. It's just like a little bit of play, and guess what? You're off to the races. Everything is in a whole different place.
And it is the most loving and kind thing that a person can do. When you learn active listening in a communication, which means being able to look at subtle clues, noticing eye position, noticing body position, really paying attention to the cadence of their voice, not just the words, but how is it coming out? What does the person look like? A person can feel so cared about. And you then actually have the great privilege of actually understanding what the heck they're talking about in a real way. It makes me laugh. You ever heard of somebody the saying you offended their ancestors? I think I offended their ancestors, right? I think that's more true than people realize. You literally, someone will take offense to something that goes back 150 years, right?
That's true.
Not
That's
about today. It's
uh,
not about what you said necessarily, maybe the way it was said, the tone it was said, right?
yeah,
The time of
yeah.
day it was said. So I think if people could understand all of this a little bit more, that your communication and talking it out often is only a way to just dig the hole deeper. But learning how to communicate in a different way, understanding where your communication really comes from, can be life-changing.
And utilizing some of the small keys. These are just a couple of things from Cognomovement, just a couple of little tips. Now, Cognomovement has hundreds and hundreds of moves in it that make you seem like you're some sort of wizard, but basically what you're a neurological detective and a technician.
Yeah.
And with it, you become a person that can really be of service. That's why the Cognomovement practitioners are, we hear it over and over that it's the most joyful job they've ever done in their life. And it's the most joyful job they've ever done in their life because you can imagine being in with a husband and wife, and you crack the code. You
Yeah.
crack the code, and now you've got the parents, and that you've saved a marriage, all the children, and what's going to be affected with their marriages. These little children go off to have a better life.
Yeah, it's really so true. And so many of the people who learn Cognomovement at the practitioner level, they take it and put it into all areas of their life, but also different kinds of work, speech therapy, working with police. Imagine a lawyer who had these tools, who knew how to work just a little bit of that in the courtroom, right? There's
Oh
so
my gosh. Can you imagine? I never even thought about that,
uh,
Liz. Imagine working with the jury. We're working if you knew some of these, I never even thought of that.
right? Very true.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. That would be like magic. That would be like magic. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, I think the whole world needs to have a better understanding about how we actually truly communicate. And if we did, I think we'd have a much, much better world. So, everybody, we've run out of time for today. But if you're interested in knowing more about all of these tools, Cognomovement.com is the place to go. And we have a place to start, to try this whole thing on, to learn the basics. And it's really, really easy. It's called the Essentials Program. Or if you're one of those people who's hearing this and said, I need to get that practitionership, info@cognomovement.com and set up a call. We'll talk to you about how all of that works and how you can qualify to become a practitioner. All right, Bill McKenna, we're done for today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And until next time, everybody be safe and be well.
Thanks for being here with us on the New Life Perspective radio show. For more information or to find out more about the work that Bill and I do, please visit us at cognomovement.com or email us at info@cognomovement.com. See you again soon.